Good morning. We are on to chapter 4, sports fan cultures. Um, this is always a fun chapter, describing how fans and why fans consume sports is an interesting one. On some levels, some of you in this class probably are die-hard fans of certain sports or certain sports teams, just like this guy in this picture here. But on another level, some of you guys probably don't care for sports. I'm not gonna lie. When I was much younger, I didn't really have a sports fan identification or sense of identification with many teams. For whatever reason, I didn't have that sense of pride until much later on in life, and I'm sure some of you guys in this class probably feel the same way. But regardless, you guys all exist somewhere within a sports fan culture and somewhere on the sports fan continuum, as you guys will see. And that's kind of what this chapter is about, is figuring out where people stand and what their motivations are. So just a review. Um, Chapter 2 really outlined what I would call the key stakeholders within sporting communities. One was the participants, and like I said, each and every one of you were a participant in sports to some degree at some point in your life. As we aged, that participation level dropped off to some extent, depending on where you are. After that was the organizations and the governing bodies. Again, it could be things as small as like a CYO or a PAL league, from as big as like the NCAA or the NFL. Last chapter, we most recently discussed media entities. Media entities are particularly interesting because of these things, media entities has probably changed the most, and it's had to evolve with evolving technologies. Now we're moving on to fans, right? I think fans are particularly interesting because if you think about it and think about how popular sports are at the collegiate and professional level, um, sports would not exist without sports fan cultures. They simply wouldn't. Would we probably partake in sports if fans weren't a thing? Sure, right? There's other reasons why we partake in it, but they would not exist in their current popularity without these cultures. So we've got to ask, really, like, what are fans, right? So how do we define a fan? What's the meaning of being a fan? And the truth is, there's really no right or wrong way to define a fan. Now we try to categorize people based on their actions, based on their emotions and things like that, which you guys will see. But there's no right or wrong way. What do sports fans do? Well, listen, they add passion. Like I said, uh, there's nothing bigger, right, than going to a live sporting event and hearing the sounds, hearing the emotions. As you guys all experienced just this past year when St. Peter's went on a incredible, like once in a lifetime type run in the NCAA tournament. If any of you guys were actually at the game or if any of you guys were at St. Peter's at the viewing parties, right? Think about that kind of passion, right? And there's groups and cultures all across the US and world that have that same kind of passion for their teams. In addition to passion, I think what comes with passion is really just added money, right? In the US alone, we've spent $56 billion just attending games in 2016. So yeah, there's a lot of money in sports, which is one of the reasons why we probably study it. Um, pride, that sense of identification with the team. Um, what else with sports fans? Well, I think it's interesting that really sports have the largest TV viewership. For those of you guys that don't watch sports, I'm sure there's a few of you guys in this classroom. I think it's hard for some people to grasp that sports are watched more than anything else on television, right? Let's look at the next slide, right? Most watched sporting events of 2013, right? The Super Bowl. We need to know that the NFL absolutely dominates viewership. It is not even close, right? These are other sporting events, and if you look in 2013, how the Super Bowl had 108 million viewers, right? And you look at every single playoff game leading up to that Super Bowl, destroyed everything else in terms of viewership. Not even close. NBA Finals did a quarter of what the Super Bowl did. And this is just other sporting events. Not only does the NFL dominate viewership, but the NFL dominates anything. Like in your text, it talks about how the viewership numbers for like finales for shows like Big Bang Theory or Game of Thrones, pick your poison, right? I think it was like 16 or 18 million. Meanwhile, your average Monday night or Sunday night football game is just destroying that in terms of ratings. So you can see that sports are viewed and consumed to much higher extent than even your most popular television shows. So types. All right, I want you guys to think. Types. First, we just kind of need to delineate between a spectator versus a fan, right? A spectator, right? A spectator is somebody who watches and observes, while a fan has some great sense of devotion. Most recently, one of my gym members, she said she was going to the Giants game, and I was immediately like my eyes lit up. I said, "Oh, you're going to the Giants game?" It was a Monday night football game. It was Giants against Cowboys. At the time, the Giants were 2-0. Cowboys are struggling with a backup quarterback. I said, "That's a major game," and she kind of just smiled, and she said, "So I hear." Um, and immediately I know like she's not really a fan. And I asked her, I said, "Are you a Giants fan?" And sure enough, she said, "No." She's like, "It's hard for me to understand the rules of football." So she is someone who is clearly just a spectator. She was going to the game, but she was going for a very different reason than other people, which we'll kind of talk about in later slides, right? But you can clearly see me being a fan versus my friend at the gym who was much more of a spectator. Now, being a fan, right? Not all fans are created equal, as you guys saw in that first opening slide with that crazy fan body paint and all of that, versus other types of fans. And I wouldn't just think of it as like one or the other. I drew these arrows here is because it's a continuum. You've got your fair weather fan versus a diehard fan. Um, and I think you kind of have to look at it as a few different ways. And Cottingham assessed the ways you can really break down a fair weather versus a diehard. One is team performance, right? So when the teams are doing relatively well, all fans are kind of on board and excited. But when your team is doing relatively poorly, fair weather fans kind of fade to the back. I think we've all seen that Homer Simpson meme where it's like, he's a fan of one team and then he kind of fades to the back as the team does a little poorly and then maybe emerges as a different fan. Those are like the bottom of the barrel, the fair weather fans who, if the team isn't performing well, they don't really care and they kind of forget about the team. As opposed to diehards, where no matter whether the team is winning or losing, right, regardless of performance, diehards are absolutely nutty. They're talking about them 24/7. Another way you could look at your diehard fans versus your fair weather is weather, right? So you could look at some of your diehard fans. If there's like really adverse weather, are they going to still attend a game, right? I think of it as the sport of golfing, and this isn't really viewing things, but in the sport of golf, right? I enjoy to play. I enjoy to play golf, right? But when it gets into like mid-October, late October, definitely November, I will probably never play golf because I'm not playing golf in 30 to 50 degree weather. Not for me. But my family owns restaurants that's on a golf course, and I'm there frequently. I see the diehards. I see diehards playing golf in the middle of December when it's 25, 30 degrees out. As long as there's no snow on the ground, those diehards are going to play. And the same would really apply to fans and going to games. And then lastly, how you can categorize diehards versus fair weather is really knowledge of the game or knowledge of the team. So those diehards are going to remember every single stat, say like, oh, this player averaged 22 points per game and 10 assists that year, or that player hit 66 home runs in 97, whatever it is. Well, I wouldn't say 66, but you get the point of Well, was it Sosa that hit 66 and 98? I think it was 98. But you get the idea. They remember everything. They remember records. They remember the player's stats, so on and so forth, right? Versus the Fairweather, they probably don't really remember much of anything, at least at the bottom end of the spectrum. So really, you should start to think in terms of kind of where you exist for what team, right? So me, for instance, in terms of individual identification for teams, like in terms of the major sports, I'm definitely a Knicks fan and more towards the medium to die hard side of being a New York Knicks fan. But as far as football goes, in terms of me being a Giants fan, I'm probably definitely middle to more fair weather for a very specific reason. That being with football, I identify more with fantasy football instead of the Giants individually, right? So start to think for you, like with your teams, are you more of a diehard with one team and fair weather with another? Right? For me, I remember the Knicks making the NBA Finals in 1994, and John Starks was a point guard on the Knicks in 1994. He basically broke the record for the most amount of missed three-point attempts, and that's why we lost the damn championship. Hakeem Olajuwon. Right? It crushed me. I was like 9 years old, and I remember it to this day. Right? That definitely puts me on the diehard spectrum. Right? But again, with the Giants, yeah, they won Super Bowls in '09, and I forget the one before that, and I remember some things, but I definitely don't have that diehard passion for the Giants like I do for the Knicks. Although I'm still a fan. Okay. So really start to think where you exist, because this is going to be part of your assignment later on. Now, you don't have to simply think of it in terms of fair weather versus diehard, right? Sutton, McDonald's, and et al. Basically categorize fans three different ways: being a social fan, a focused fan, and a vested fan. And they kind of broke it down where social fans want to connect with others. So that could be my gym member, where she was going to the Giants game, she doesn't know much about it, but she was going to have a good time and hang out with her friends, right? Then there's focused fans, and they have moderate identification, and I'm probably a moderate, or excuse me, a focused fan for the New York Giants, right? Like I feel good when they win, but it doesn't really ruin my day when they lose. Vested fans are emotional, right? There's people that it absolutely ruins their day when their teams lose, right? So it's that emotional attachment. Now, there's one other distinction, not outlined by Sutton at all, which was the dysfunctional fan. And this could be the overly aggressive fan. I put a picture here of the Bills Mafia. We're going to talk a little bit about Bills Mafia in this presentation. Bills Mafia, we've heard of them, right? We've seen the videos of them jumping through tables, on fire, crazy, crazy people. That could be an example of Bills Mafia. A real clean example of a dysfunctional fan, I should say, is hooliganism, right? So hooliganism is violent or aggressive behavior, sometimes in a gang-like format. So if any of you seen the movie Green Street Hooligans, came out a while ago, I mean, that is a perfect example of a dysfunctional fan, right? They have this deep-rooted, entrenched identification with a specific sport, and because of that deep-rooted feelings, they have these great sense of emotions, which can and do inevitably lead to aggressive behaviors, right? So that is the dysfunctional fan. If you've ever been to a sporting event, you've heard the one fan that is screaming, cursing, yelling, starting fights with other people. That is the example of a dysfunctional fan. Motivations. What motivates us to be a fan, right? I've talked about some of these already, right, in previous chapters. Aesthetic beauty. I love the sport of basketball. I think it's just, poetry in motion. I just listed two players, Kyrie Irving and Steph Curry. Especially during Steph Curry's MVP runs, it was just he just played a really beautiful game. Anytime he got the ball, he was constantly moving, pick and rolls, and really the entire Golden State Warriors, and they were fun to watch. The Splash Brothers, him, Klay Thompson, right? They were just really a beautiful game to watch, and I did enjoy that. Personally, I could identify with the beauty of NBA. Achievement. achievement, is that paired sense of accomplishment with your team. Um, we've probably heard of this before, is certain fans and certain stadiums really can be considered the 12th man, where they're so loud and so sometimes even obnoxious, where they distract a team and they provide that sense of home field advantage, right? And this doesn't have to be at major sporting events. Even at the like high school levels, right? You have the crazy student bodies that do all sorts of things, and you see these things on ESPN. I think there was the one where they I don't know, did like a birth of a fan. I don't know, but you get the point of what the 12th man is. Another reason would be drama, right? Drama. We all go to a sporting event and want to see a close game. I don't think anyone wants to see blowouts. I mean, sometimes if it's a rivalry, you just want to absolutely crush your opponent. But I think we would all want a close game that your team inevitably does win, right? One example that I put forth that some of you guys probably don't know, because this is from like 1995-ish, give or take, was the Reggie Miller Act, as I call it. In 1995, Reggie Miller was a regular season game, was playing the New York Knicks, and I was watching this, and the Knicks were up by 6 with 30 seconds left. I don't know, something along those lines. And game was over. Me and my brother were relaxed. We were talking about other things. And all of a sudden, Reggie Miller goes on one of the most memorable runs in NBA history, memorable scoring runs. He ends up scoring 8 points in 8 seconds. He hits a 3, cuts it to 5, or he hits a 3, cuts it to 2. He steals the ball, hits another 3, and I don't know, I think he had another steal. They fouled him, and he scored 8 points in, I believe it was 8 seconds. It's something I'll never forget, and my team ended up on the losing end of that drama. Now, much more recently, that some of you probably have seen, the Jets had a absolutely insane, impossible, I should say, win over the Browns, where the Jets were down. They were down 14 points, 2 touchdowns with 2 minutes to go, right? Every scenario was that the Jets would lose like 99.99% of the time. It was essentially impossible. But the Jets came back and scored and ended up winning the game with 2 minutes to go, which is it was one of the most incredible games I've ever seen. And I'm not a Jets fan. I just remember at the end, and I was watching it, and I was talking to my wife, and I said, like, this is impossible. And she's not a sports fan like I am, so I don't think she understood how crazy it was for the Jets to come back and win. Like, that's the type of drama we're talking about. I didn't really put it in this slide, but the best drama is when we actually get into the playoffs and the finals, and probably the most historic game in NFL history that I can really remember. It was last year with the Chiefs and the Bills, right? It was one of the most epic, drama-filled games I've ever seen, where in the last 2 minutes, each team scored 2 touchdowns, and I think it was a touchdown to win it. So maybe it was 5 touchdowns in the last 2 minutes plus overtime, and it was back and forth and back and forth. And 2 of the youngest quarterbacks in the NFL and the brightest quarterbacks in the NFL, and Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes, right? That's the drama we look for. That's what really, like, imagine a young kid going to that game. Right? If a young kid is at that game, the Bills Chiefs, right? That could really set his fandom for the rest of his life. He will never forget that, right? Other reasons why we might not watch sports are the escape, right? Or be fans is the escape. I've already told you guys, right? And I say, right, that it changes. I think when you're younger, I think sometimes you don't have as much of that need to escape, or you pursue other things like video games to escape. For me, nowadays, it's very different. I absolutely nowadays consume sports more to escape, and I don't purposely do it, but it just makes me feel good. On Sunday, I'll sit on the couch 3 to 4 hours and just watch the NFL, and nothing else really matters during those 3 to 4 hours. And you guys will see, I'm sure some of you guys feel that, right? Some of you guys, if you have big assignments or whatever it is, you probably feel the same way. Knowledge, another one, probably not quite as much, but like, you want to learn the sport. The book provides an example of like a parent trying to learn a sport. If my daughter started playing, I don't know, a sport that I'm not really familiar with, like field hockey. Well, I'm probably going to start to watch a sport, become a fan of the sport, so I can learn it for her. And then the last thing is that social connection. Like we said, that's the person at the gym, or she went to the Giants game because of that social connection. And many of us feel that way. Many of us just simply like to go to maybe a sports bar, right, and hang out with friends, have a drink, watch a game. Very, very common. All right, this is getting a little long, so I'll move a little quicker here. But sports fan identification. This can be a few different things. You could have this psychological expression of your identification. We've already mentioned Berging and Corfing, right? Basking in reflected glory or cutting off reflected failures. You know, if your team has a bad loss, are you just mopey the next day, or you forget about your team and you don't want to talk about them, whatever it is? You're experiencing that Corfing. Um, and obviously, the extent to which we experience or go through Berging and Corfing is probably related to the intensity of our fandom, right? It can also define and shape communities. So earlier on the slide, I said Bills Mafia fans can be crazy. There probably are some dysfunctional Bills Mafia fans, but it can also be a good thing. So Bills Mafia, right? They are I shouldn't say notorious. They are famous, because notorious implies bad. They're famous for actually giving back to the community. They haven't done this with just one instance. They've done this on many instances where if they play against a team, and then either before or after they play against a team, they donate to a specific charity. So like most recently, Tua Tagovailoa, I can't pronounce that. Tua was most recently hurt and had a concussion and or spinal injury, and Bills fans immediately after that game donated to a given charity for Tua. And before that, they've donated to hurricane victims from, I think it was Hurricane Katrina, if I remember correctly. But Bills Mafia fans are very famous for giving back, right? And that really helps shape their community. So as much as people think they're crazy, there is definitely, at least if you're informed, this positive aspect to being a Bills Mafia fan. There are some negative identification aspects of being a fan as well, right? So you could talk about franchises relocating, and fans being very, very unhappy with franchises or simply cutting them off, right? But the most famous, right, negative identification incident was when LeBron James signed with the Miami Heat. Right, so it was the infamous decision, and that was infamous. Um, you know, the day after, there was a tremendous amount of fallout, and we kind of look back and even think back to this and say, like, what was his PR team, right, really thinking when they had this entire production of where he decided he was going to go? And listen, it was a major event. And one of the major things that came out of that was the video of fans burning his jerseys. And really, it's kind of become this thing where now, anytime a athlete or an elite athlete goes to a different organization, they burn a jersey. But that really started and was born out of LeBron James' decision. All right, your assignment. So we've got two aspects to your assignment. This is fan ethics and your sporting identity. So for one, read A Matter of Ethics for this chapter. Now, after that, what I want you to do after you've read it, find an instance where fans may have engaged in unethical behavior. So basically, go on the internet, go on the Googles, and find an example of where fans may have engaged in unethical behavior. And there's many. Right? There's many, many, many. So provide a link to the story and simply summarize the story for me. This could be something as ridiculous as a fan hitting an athlete. It could be a fan taunting an athlete. I mean, there's plenty of Russell Westbrook stories. He's always getting into trouble. It could be fans throwing things at athletes. Find one. Find a story. And then after you've summarized it, I want you to go back and look at the questions from the chapter. So address questions 1 and 2 regarding the limits for fans and what they can or can't do, and really how you can enforce these things, which I think can be tricky and difficult, although it is possible. Then after that is probably the more interesting assignment, really. tell me about your sports identity, right? So choose a sports team, obviously of your choosing, and tell me, are you a spectator or are you a fan? And maybe there's a person in this class who really has zero interest in sports whatsoever. And if you did, I kind of feel bad for you being in this class. After that, where do you fall on the Fairweather diehard fan continuum? I kind of told you guys, right? I'm a bit more of a diehard Knick fan. For the Yeah, I'm a bit of a diehard Knick fan, but for the Giants, I'm probably in the middle. Definitely wouldn't categorize myself as a Fairweather fan. Um, and then lastly, right, this is most important, right? We're trying to connect these things back to the chapter now. Explain how you relate or cannot relate, at least specifically to your team, to the 6 fan motives listed in this chapter, right? So those 6 fan motives listed in this chapter that we talked about were aesthetics, right?